Before the break, I said that I was going to go through this magazine and also give you my phone number again in the event you'd like to call in. If in any of these topics you'd like to talk about or you have any questions, I'll hang myself out there a little bit and say, please feel free to call in, open the dialogue. Let's talk about it a little bit. That phone number is 541-388-1110. So in today's bulletin, there was a little insert called The Key, Unlock the Answers to Home Ownership in Central Oregon. And there were actually a series of articles that were written for this piece that were submitted by some of the, different people in our community. And, the fortunate thing is, as I said earlier, they're not, professional writers that are in Washington, D.C. and telling us. They're really, here in Bend, Oregon. And they're telling us, some of the things as they're seeing from Bend looking out. All too often we read some of these articles and they start to tell us about what it's like in Des Moines or New Jersey or New York and Florida. And quite frankly, Bend, Oregon, has some similarities, but really very few to some of those areas. So the very first article was written by Wendy Atkinson here of Bend is the real estate cycle. And it just sort of explains that in the real estate market throughout the time of history, there has always been a cycle. We hear it, referenced as a buyer's market or a seller's market, and that's just simply the shift of inventory, whether there's a lot of inventory or no inventory. If there's a whole bunch of inventory, it favors the buyers. If there's not much of it, it favors the sellers. It's pretty straight ahead. But one of the things that is on this article is there's a graph of the median income price, and the median income price, moves up from being just slightly over $150,000 in the year 2000, and then by 2005 it jumps up to $350,000. Then it drops back down to under $200,000 in 2010, 2011, and then starts that climb to go back up. But a couple of the things that we need to be mindful of is, during that same time too, there's really been a fair amount of appreciation. So, when in 2005, 2006, when it was up, the median price point was over $350,000. That doesn't sound like that much, but 2006 was 10 years ago. 2005, 2006 were 10 years ago, and in 10 years, I'm certain that your grocery shopping, like my grocery shopping, you found that, automobiles, almost everything takes much more money. So to say that we're at or near those values, we're still below those values, particularly if we do an adjustment to them. But, the question that I'm asked frequently is, are we going to have another bubble? Is the bubble about to pop? And I think that's a question, that's a fair and honest question. And obviously, there were a number of people that were hurt. And, Wendy in her article here, tries to, express some of that and also sort of tell and share with people how some of those things have been changed a fair amount, which will have a dramatic effect moving forward. Because, in Bend, again, urban growth boundary, there's so many things that come into play that it's not just the median price point cycling. It doesn't get to cycle all by itself. And so, historically, we run in about 6 to 8 year cycles. That seems to be the way it is. Do we see those days reoccurring? Well, right now we're starting to see that, actually in the higher price point, we're seeing, more price reductions and longer times on the market and all that, which is showing some stability up in that higher end. It's a little bit more of a, disposable income end of the market, if you will, because quite honestly, people that are buying homes that are, $500,000 and more aren't people that are working minimum wage jobs. You have to have obviously some substantial income to be able to qualify for that style of financing, and even have to have more income if you can pay cash for that sort of thing. And then, and then she goes further, well, will there be the next shift be as substantial as the last one where we had the bubble burst? And it asks the question, are we smarter than we were 10 years ago? That's what she says, we're smarter. And I don't know, if I want to throw myself into that collective, but I think that the lending guidelines that have been implemented during that 10 years certainly make the lending process much more conservative and don't allow for some of those things to get so wildly out of hand. So, when we go to look at it, as before the break, I was talking about this being a good time, and how does it look as we go forward? Well, when you take the challenge of the lending process, and you also realize that the reality is with the urban growth boundary and affordable land, if it's kind of a ripple effect. We have to have a lot of available land so that we can have an influx of a lot more inventory. Then with a lot more inventory, it'll come to balance, and then we'd be able to have that shift between supply and demand. And so because of the ability of that land coming online is out sometime, for those people that are thinking about buying, this is, it's a great time to buy. And then I like the way that the article is closed. It says, but, instead of, worrying about the bubble and the stability of the market and all of that, to make a good decision in buying and selling, it makes sense to work out what works for you, your family, and your lifestyle. And that's really where the basis of your home and your shelter and that purchase should be. We're starting to see boomerang buyers. This is written by Tony Rissing, who wrote this article. And basically what that's referencing is that there were people that were blemished. Their credit was blemished during the economic downturn. It got to the point to where they were having a hard time not only making their mortgage payment, making other payments. Their credit ratings took a hit. After they did their subsequent short sale or bankruptcy, there's a timeline after that's settled before you can qualify for residential financing. So now we're starting to see those people starting to come back into the market. Another article written by Kevin Pangle from Evergreen Mortgage here, which is really quite an interesting one that talks about, we always hear all of these changes that happened in the mortgage industry, and what does that mean? And this article really does a very, very good job of talking about the national mortgage licensing system, which is a way that the consumer can track the individual mortgage brokers before they go, so that it's sort of a lifetime number that's assigned to each of these folks, so that you can find out, how that works. There was also, as a result of the 2006, 2007, 2005, 2006, what was happening where people were literally borrowing money, going and putting a down payment on a new home to be built that they had absolutely no intention of buying, because property prices were moving up at such a rate that they knew that it would be worth $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 more by the time the 4 months passed for the construction period. So by putting, $10,000 down, they could wait for the home to be completed, and by the time it was completed, sell it to somebody else and make $20,000 or $30,000. So basically what happened is the lending process implemented a 90-day flip period in there, so that there's 3 months there where you can't just secure a piece of property without securing financing and actually buying the property. You're not allowed to put yourself in a position to flip that. And they also, as everybody knows, changed the relationships on what they call the ATR, the ability to repay. They want to know that your income can repay the loan during the time of the loan. So there's some people that say, they want to know everything. They want to know my blood type. They want to know that. But in the overall picture, it makes our buyers much more stable going in, which in turn makes our economy much more stable, which in turn reduces the risk of the big bubble, the big burst. The tighter mortgage insurance requirements. TRID has been a real interesting thing, and I don't even know what the heck the acronym stands for, but it's basically, it was just another incarnation of it. Was just implemented here October 3rd. And one of the things that we're told in the newspapers and all that was it was going to take longer to buy a home, and it was much more rigorous and all of that. But the whole entire program is set up to benefit the buyer, so that when the buyer, unfortunately, that it's sort of all compiled closer to the end of the transaction instead of at the beginning of the transaction, but it breaks out absolutely every associated expense that went into purchasing that home. What it costs, in many cases it even includes the cost of your home inspection and a number of other things that are in there. So another really good article, and it's sure well worth a read. And if ever the Ben Bulletin's been worth spending $1 and going down and get a copy of it, today may be a good time.